single day, like I've always done and always will.
Passing these bills on the floor, making yet another stand.
Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Chantal Destra. This week, both chambers of the legislature released their respective one-house budget resolutions. Both chambers rejected parts of the governor's executive budget proposal while adding some of their own provisions. The main deviations were around involuntary confinement, discovery reform, and the governor's proposed rebate checks. State Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins told reporters that her conference crafted the budget with a focus on affordability.
The Senate Democratic majority is fighting to keep New York affordable and provide real relief for families, workers, and small businesses.
And while taking questions from reporters, Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie reiterated his chamber's position that specific policy items should be discussed outside of budget negotiations.
The governor has the right to raise anything at the table, just like the Senate does. The Senate put a lot of policy into their budget, but this is just something that the Assembly decided a few years ago that we would like to leave most of the budget discussion on actual numbers for the state.
Now that the legislature's resolutions have been released, the governor and leaders can officially start negotiations in good faith. It's also clear that the main focus of the trio heading into budget talks is affordability. Now that can be done in a variety of ways, such as focusing on housing, wages, and tax credits. So to unpack the different ways to address affordability in the state this year, here's our Elise Klein with a deep dive.
State lawmakers are trying to address affordability before the legislative session comes to an end in June. They are trying to tackle the issue on several fronts, including housing, wages, and taxes. Affordable housing continues this year to be a big topic of discussion as budget conversations move toward a final budget. New York State Division of Homes and Community Renewal Commissioner Ruth Ann Wisnauskas says the biggest way to bring down housing costs is through supply.
One of the ways that we can help bring down that pressure and the rising cost is by having more supply. And so we need to work with localities to get more housing built. We need to work with our nonprofit and for-profit development community to get more housing built.
Wisnauskas says she plans to continue working with the legislature and the executive chamber on building more affordable housing units.
Only through this sort of work with the legislature and the executive year over year sort of approving all these measures, we're going to build a real sort of set of policies and set of funding programs that will support New Yorkers, and people will feel less stress around housing and feel sort of less stress economically.
Some Democratic lawmakers are also pushing for housing policy in the state budget that would establish a state housing access voucher program. The measure has been put in lawmakers' one-house budget proposals for the last few years, but it hasn't made it into the final version. The governor previously voiced concerns about funding for this program in the budget taking away from other programs. State Senator Brian Kavanaugh, a Democrat and chair of the Housing Committee representing Lower Manhattan, says it's a widely supported measure and that housing vouchers aren't a new concept to implement.
Voucher programs have been around for half a century, and governments, the federal government, other state governments make vouchers available. They make a specific number of vouchers available, and the amount that the program costs depend on how many vouchers they make available. So this is a program that could be launched very substantial, but in a way that would manage the fiscal impact.
Elizabeth Mackey, a community leader for Vocal New York's Homeless Union, says this program passing through the budget would mean more affordable housing, both for unhoused New Yorkers and New Yorkers unable to afford rising rent prices.
So we really, want to let the governor know that this bill is very important to pass because housing is a human right and that we need more affordable housing, not just for those that's in a shelter, but for all that cannot afford these high rents that is out here that's burdening the families and individuals here in New York City.
Mackey, who is currently holding a CityFEPS voucher, has been advocating for this issue for over 2 years after experiencing homelessness and the challenges that came with navigating finding housing.
I was unhoused for a year, but it felt like 10 years because of the systems that is out here. And if you don't know how to advocate the system of being homeless, you could get lost.
Mackey says she used her tools and resources working previously for the city, but she still faced challenges such as waiting long periods of time in a shelter before getting a voucher. Mackey adds the state of shelters is poor.
It's like you got to fight for everything. You got to fight for a blanket, fight for a pillow. You just got to just fight for your life to be in a shelter.
Mackey says she's frustrated lawmakers and the executive office haven't been able to pass this measure, but she hopes they fight harder this year. A fight seems to be what lawmakers plan to bring for this policy measure, trying to get it in the final state budget. Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal, Democrat representing parts of Hell's Kitchen and chair of the Housing Committee in the Assembly, stresses the voucher program will have a significant impact for New Yorkers by providing them with a ladder out of poverty.
But in the state, we need to provide vouchers for people so they can stay in their apartments and also escape homelessness.
Some Republicans say they are supportive of the measure, but they have questions about means testing, a process to ensure individuals are eligible based on their salary. State Senator Jack Martins, a Republican representing parts of Nassau County, says in order for this program to work properly, there has to be a way to ensure people in bad faith don't take advantage of it.
In order for it to be truly affordable, we need to make sure that that affordability is there for people who actually need it, and it doesn't become abuse by those who receive it when they needed it and then refuse to get out to make room for somebody else who will need it down the road.
The bill is currently still being worked out in committee. However, the measure was put into lawmakers' one-house budget proposals, which means they will be a part of budget talks with the governor. In the last few one-house budget resolutions, which are the legislature's budget proposals, lawmakers have asked for $250 million in the final budget for this measure. Lawmakers stuck with the same allocation this year. Rosenthal says she hopes the governor, who has not given the green light for this measure in the final budget over the past few years, finally sees the urgency of this issue.
But it's even more important this year with all the cuts in HUD coming down, perhaps, the end of vouchers, funding for public housing. It's more important than ever that the state step up and take care of its residents.
State lawmakers and legislative leaders are also pushing for other measures to address affordability. Taxes. In her executive budget proposal, Governor Kathy Hochul proposed cuts to middle-class taxes, inflation rebate checks, and expanding the child tax credit. Some fiscal policy experts who testified at a recent budget hearing told WMHT the governor's budget measures are not an effective affordability agenda. Nathan Gustorf, the executive director of the Fiscal Policy Institute, says the middle-class tax cuts, for example, wouldn't have that significant of an impact on lower-income New Yorkers.
So everyone likes the idea of a tax cut. Unfortunately, $1 billion sent to such a large population translates into a pretty small amount of money for the people who actually receive the benefit. For a middle-class household, it comes out to $15 a month, which, needless to say, is not really noticeable.
Gustorf also says the state would get a better return on its investment by putting dollars into public programs and services such as childcare, affordable housing, and transportation. And some lawmakers like State Senator Gustavo Rivera, a Democrat representing parts of the Bronx, agree.
When we invest in public services, transportation, when we invest in those things, we make it so that economic activity can occur.
Some lawmakers also feel measures like a policy to establish a working families tax credit will have a significant impact for families. State Senator Andrew Gennardis, a Democrat representing parts of Brooklyn and the sponsor of the tax credit bill, says New Yorkers shouldn't have to be rich to provide for their families.
Here's a fact. 3 out of the top 10 cities in the United States of America for child poverty are right here in New York State. That is criminal.
The legislation, if passed, would give families up to $1,600 per child annually to pay for essentials like groceries, rent, and childcare. The measure would also be tied to inflation to address rising costs. Jasmine Gripper, the co-director of the New York State Working Families Party, says while the governor has attempted to put money back in New Yorkers' pockets through budget proposal measures like expanding the child tax credit, New Yorkers need more.
And the governor's child tax credit would move the maximum amount from $300 to $1,000 per child, but the working families tax credit would go from $300 to $1,600 per child. So more money in people's pockets.
Gripper adds the working families tax credit also expands state assistance beyond the age of 4 to the age of 17. Some Republican lawmakers across the aisle say they need to review the details of the bill, but they support the concept of providing relief to working families. This measure made it into lawmakers' one-house budget proposals. Senator Gennardis says he feels good about the support the bill has. Another measure some lawmakers and advocates are pushing for to tackle affordability is wages. Some lawmakers are trying to pass a bill that would increase the minimum wage outside of New York City. State Senator Jessica Ramos, a Democrat representing parts of Queens, says this is a wage disparity issue for upstate workers and it needs to be addressed.
Because the cost of living, of course, is high across the state. And there's also something to say about a person's value when it comes to the work they've put in. A worker who does the work upstate is not different than a worker who does the work downstate and deserves the same wage.
Stephanie Heslop, a food service worker at Cornell University, has seen firsthand how difficult the pressures of living costs can be. She says every dollar matters, and this legislation, if passed, would be life-changing for a lot of people.
I have coworkers who are at or past retirement age who are working multiple physically demanding jobs. It's really heartbreaking. I have coworkers living out of their cars on Section 8. Many of my coworkers can't afford to live in Ithaca or even in Tompkins County because it's so expensive.
While the bill hasn't passed in previous years, Ramos feels good about its chances this year. Last year, she says the primary focus on wages was tying the minimum wage to inflation. Now that they've achieved that, they can focus on disparities like this one. Some Republican lawmakers say legislators have already dealt with the wage issue after increasing the minimum wage last year to $15 an hour and tying it to inflation. Meanwhile, State Senator Tom O'Mara, representing parts of the Southern Tier and a ranking member of the Finance Committee, says changes to the minimum wage have happened too quickly, and he has concerns about additional changes negatively impacting businesses.
And I've supported the minimum wage increases from where it was, but not at the rate that we've jumped to now. But it's on autopilot now. This year was the last year of an automatic 50% per hour phase-in increase. It's going to track the CPI going forward. So that's going to go up. But it's concerning because it is driving up the cost of doing business.
But Ramos argues the cost of business will continue to go up if customers and clients don't have disposable income to spend.
So I think it's wise to help produce more customers with more purchasing power, and that means raising the wage.
Some Republicans also say they feel Democrats are on a different page when it comes to tackling affordability. State Senate Minority Leader Rob Orr, representing parts of Niagara County, Orleans County, and parts of Monroe County, says Democrats' solution to affordability is spending state dollars on different measures, while Republicans feel there are other ways.
The only answer seems to be, from the Democrats, to spend more tax dollars, right? Not to give it back per se, or to take less, but they're growing the budget. I think the governor's proposal is $8 billion more. And I'll keep saying this. I've said it many times. I'm sure my members are tired of hearing it, but if we could spend our way to affordability, we'd be there.
Republican lawmakers have introduced 2 bills intending to achieve affordability by cutting taxes on cash tips and overtime. Or it says a measure like this one goes further than the governor's proposal of a one-time rebate check.
I think there's something different about letting people keep money they went and worked for in their pocket.
State Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, representing parts of Westchester, argues this policy proposed by Republicans is tired.
The fact that they're echoing talking points from the president, quite honestly, I don't believe that is an original thought. And he says he's going to do it on a national level, so he should, do that. So if they come with some original thought, we're always willing to hear, because, again, we are all focused on making sure New Yorkers' lives are better.
O'Mara says it's going to be challenging for lawmakers to come together on these issues in the budget.
And it's very tenuous because we're coming at it from completely different angle. We're trying to make New York State as affordable as possible. The Democrats' perspective is, let's just take money from this group and shift it over to this group so that this group can afford to pay the outrageous costs of living in New York. That's not a long-term solution.
The final budget is due April 1st, and lawmakers still have a ways to go to sort out their differences on affordability issues. In the coming weeks, lawmakers will be negotiating with the governor's office before the budget is finalized. Elise Klein, New York Now.
And a part of affordability naturally has to deal with household expenses, including utility rates. State Senator Kevin Parker, who serves as chair of the State Senate Energy and Telecommunications Committee, has a legislative package aimed at addressing high utility rates for New Yorkers. The senator is pushing for it to be included in the final enacted budget. We sat down with the senator to unpack the package and discuss the ways in which solar energy and federal funding can also help combat those high rates. Here's that conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to connect with us today, Senator.
I'm really happy to have this opportunity.
And we're excited to be here. And first, I wanted to get into your newly introduced legislative package meant to modernize utility processes in the state and help New Yorkers with those high energy bills. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, well, first of all, I'm the chairman of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee here in the state Senate. And one of the things we know happening both in my district in Brooklyn, across the state of New York, and across the country is an affordability gap. People are just having a really, really hard time making their ends meet. We all know about the price of eggs, but people are also in real time experiencing that same kind of, sticker shock when they get their utility bills every month. And so we created a package that we passed in the New York State Senate a couple of weeks ago that really goes to utility affordability. And so there are a bunch of programs that actually exist already for seniors and for people who are low income. And one of the bills I put in is a bill that would automatically connect people to those programs instead of you having as an individual person to do the research and call the utility and find out what program and apply and so on and so forth. And so we want to make it as easy as possible for New Yorkers to hold on to their hard-earned money.
And from your purview, is there anything that the state could be doing more of in regards to the Department of Public Service to help New Yorkers, combat these high utility rates?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the other bills I have is a fixed costs bill that looks at the fixed costs that come out of the PSC and try to reduce those costs such that, again, we can lower utility rates. I think that there needs to be, just a re-examining of the criteria that the PSC is using to decide rate cases. But it is a complicated equation given the fact that utilities also have to maintain their infrastructure. So on one hand, they have to maintain their infrastructure. They do that through rate cases. On the other hand, we have utility customers who can't afford their bills. And so creating a balance through all those things is really important. And then what puts more stress on this process as a state legislator is the fact that we have an unreliable federal government, where we're not getting any help. In fact, just the opposite. And so, everyone is trying to figure out what is the next best opportunity to both lower rates, but also provide the kind of service that people need and deserve from their utilities, both on the telecom side, energy side, and water.
So how would you like to see the federal government provide help to New Yorkers on this issue?
Well, it depends on what we're talking about. Let me say first on the telecom side, there was some money under the Biden administration in the IRA legislation for the build out of high-speed broadband. Right, building out of high-speed broadband is really, really critical, both in urban areas and in a lot of rural and suburban areas where they have what they refer to as the last mile issue, where they'll build out to a certain area, but getting it from the road to your house becomes a problem. So certainly that's a place that the federal government certainly could provide resources. On the energy side, particularly as we kind of transition to a clean energy economy, it's kind of three areas of concern. One is actually getting clean energy assets into the ground to produce electrons. Those interconnections from the generation projects into the grid, need to be smoother. And this is the area that we really could use some help from the federal government on is transmission lines, what we refer to as the grid, right? And those transmission lines need to be really, really upgraded. Certainly any dollars we could get from the federal government in order to do that would be, resources we don't have to look to ratepayers for. And so those are areas that I would, tell the federal government, you want to be helpful to the people across the country. This is an area that every single state needs some help with.
And at the time that we're filming this interview, the governor just recently sent a letter to the chair and CEO of Con Edison, asking them to take a step back from their proposed rate hike. So I wanted to get your reaction to that move from the governor.
Yeah, again, I understand that the governor is taking the issue about utility affordability very seriously, as again we have. But this, we passed a set of bills on February 5th here in the state Senate. This is a package that we brought forward for the third year in a row. So this is, we're not new to this, we're true to this. And we understand that utility affordability is a main, prong in the kind of the spokes of the wheel that is turning this state. I'm very proud to have been one of the people who worked with Governor Cuomo on getting a telecom affordability package. Right now it's about $30. When I initially put it in, I put it in at $10. We wound up passing the law at $15, and then the courts made us raise it to $30. But we're one of the few states in the entire country, we may be the only one, that actually has a income-based rate for high-speed broadband. One of the things that people really don't understand is that high-speed broadband is as important as any other utility. In the same way we would not never put anyone in an apartment or a house without heat, hot water, and electricity, we, in this 2025, can't put somebody in the house or apartment without high-speed broadband. And so we need to make sure that it's as affordable as possible.
And when it comes to solar energy, is there any opportunity for the use of solar energy to help address affordability of utility rates and help protect New Yorkers?
Yeah. So, one of the things that we have here in the state of New York that I'm very proud of is something called the CLCPA, right? The Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, right? And it really is a set of the most audacious and boldest climate goals in the entire country. And we really hope to get to be net zero by 2050 is the ultimate goal, right? We have some intermediate goals as well. And so solar development is a big part of that. Probably the base of our clean energy load is actually probably hydroelectric. We kind of take it for granted because we've had it for such a long time, right? And kind of the star of that system is Niagara Falls, right? But we have a huge commitment to building out solar here in the state of New York. We have a program in NYSERDA. NYSERDA is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And within NYSERDA, we have a program called NY Sun. And that's a program that provides incentives for solar development and utility scale solar development, right? So there's going to be a lot of retail, but we're not going to get there one house at a time. We're really looking for more, again, utility scale projects to produce clean energy electrons. And then a lot of times that's paired with wind and battery storage. I refer to it as the holy trinity of sustainable energy, right? Sun in the day, wind at night, and battery storage for times that you don't have either. And so we need to build out a lot more. We have the resources here in the state of New York. We've been working towards those goals. The big legislative item for us this year is kind of creating a statewide solar siting bill that would allow one standard across the state for building solar, so that solar developers don't have to negotiate terms in every single municipality across the state, which slows down the process and makes it more expensive.
And lastly, as chair of the State Senate Committee on Energy and Telecommunications, I wanted to get your perspective on how you're hoping the state will approach protecting New Yorkers from these high utility rates in the years to come in a way that is sustainable for the state.
Well, again, within the context of the CLCPA, if we reach our goals, the more clean energy assets we get into the ground, and the better our grid is, and the more efficient our grid is, that will lower rates, right? So some of it is just really simple supply and demand. Right now, the demand for load, right? So the more, people just need more electricity, right? And so the more electricity people need, the more people are plugging stuff in, the more demand there is. And our generation has been stagnant. We really need to up ramp our generation. So we're doing that with kind of an all of the above approach as we go forward. And the more of that clean energy assets that we get into the ground, and that means that we have more supply of electricity, that's going to lower costs. Part of it also will be, a lot of weatherization work that needs to be done as well. New York is an old state. We have old buildings. We need to, retrofit those buildings. People need to plug into organizations like DHCR, the Department of Housing and Community Renewal. They have a number of weatherization programs, as well as NYSERDA has weatherization programs that allow you to get energy audits to see kind of where you're losing energy at, how to get, low energy appliances, light bulbs, those kind of things. And so part of this is a responsibility as us, or as individual homeowners and business owners, to look at our homes, our businesses, other buildings that we're occupying, and make them as energy efficient as possible, and simultaneously learn what they call demand response. So if you have a dishwasher in your house or a washer and dryer in your house, the best times to use those, those appliances are really off-peak hours, right? So like, don't turn your dishwasher on. I don't have a dishwasher. I am the dishwasher in my house, but rich people like yourself, if you have a dishwasher, turn it on at night before you go to bed, not in the middle of the day. That uses, less expensive electricity, and that will keep your bill lower, right? So those demand response protocols are things that New Yorkers need to learn, in addition to the things that we need to do our homes in terms of retrofitting our homes and our buildings.
Well, sounds like you have a lot of important work ahead, but unfortunately that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, Senator.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And we were speaking with State Senator Kevin Parker. Well, that does it for this edition of New York Now. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET,